Today marks 30 years since the release of American hostages in Iran. They were seized in November 1979. The country had exploded in revolution. A mob of Iranian students occupied the American embassy in Tehran. 52 people, from diplomats, Marine Guards to secretaries, were held hostage for 444 dark days as the United States looked on, desperate and helpless. But there were 6 Americans who escaped that day. Canada's ambassador to Iran, Ken Taylor, along with his wife and embassy staff, hid the 6 in their homes for 3 months. They used forged Canadian passports to smuggle those 6 Americans out of Iran. This is how Walter Cronkite brought news of the daring rescue to America.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. A new and daring element was disclosed today in the Iran crisis, which has held world attention for 87 days now. 4 American diplomats and wives of 2 of them were spirited out of Iran over the weekend by Canadian embassy officials. They'd given the Americans secret refuge since militants took over the U.S. Embassy last November.
When the U.S. Embassy was overrun last November 4th, these 6 Americans just happened not to be in the compound. And when, a few days later, it looked as if the embassy was in for a long siege, they sought refuge in the Canadian embassy. The Canadian ambassador, Kenneth Taylor, offered them the hospitality of the embassy despite the obvious risks. Taylor, proud of his embassy's security, was under no illusion, though. He knew that if the militants at the U.S. Embassy had learned about his hospitality, they might have stormed his embassy, too. The news of the 6 Americans at the Canadian Embassy was kept top secret.
Next week marks 30 years since the so-called Canadian caper. Now, in a new book, Robert Wright tells the story of what really happened in our man in Tehran. This morning, we're joined by that man, former Canadian Ambassador Ken Taylor. Ambassador, good morning to you. Thanks for being with us. I was watching your face during that Walter Cronkite piece just now. What were you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking 30 days later, glorious memories of the release of the diplomats, but at the same time, some chagrin at the state of U.S.-Iranian relations still at this time. Until
this book was released, you really didn't say very much at all about what really happened back in 1979.
No, there's been a fair amount of publicity about it, but Robert Wright, this is his 4th or 5th book. He went into it in detail 2 or 3 years and told the story that with the benefit of freedom of information and the willingness of people to talk now 30 years later, a good story.
Are you okay with that? I mean, we're talking about classified, top secret information at the highest levels that nobody really knew about except for maybe a handful of people, including yourself, and we're on national television talking about it this morning.
No, I think 30 years is a good time. It was a rest, it's history, and I think it's good for the public to really get an intimate look at the operations of an embassy under duress.
In that book, Wright pulls together a series of interviews and those classified or once classified documents, and we really get a chance to see the role that you played in rescuing those 6 Americans. Was there ever any point that you thought you would be killed, and not just you, but your family and your staff?
No, I thought that the revolution was moving ahead rapidly in the unpredictable times, and this was one event within the whole situation of unpredictability in Tehran. And so I thought that if we did everything carefully with prudence and some luck, we may find ourselves out safely.
Was there ever a point where you were scared, ever a point you were worried that someone, especially with the media, that this information would be leaked, someone would find out, and you would be at risk?
Well, quite candidly, about 2 months into it, Gerard Peltier from the La Presse did have the outlines of the story. He and his publisher were asked to keep the story until the U.S. diplomats left who were with us. They did that. I thought that was a very responsible act by the press.
And one of those folks actually happens to be one of our correspondents, David Martin, who also got a lead on the story as well and kept it a secret.
Yes, although La Presse and others, very much so, as you say, Terrell.
On top of providing a haven for those 6 Americans, the book talks about your secret mission. You were a spy for the CIA.
Well, I provided intelligence to the Pentagon and the CIA through Ottawa directly to Washington. The U.S. didn't have anybody there to anticipate or plan for the commando raid called Eagle Claw. They then asked myself and one colleague, and we brought in a CIA agent into the embassy, and we provided detailed information for the attempted rescue attempt in April.
When you think back on that, Ambassador, and you sit here 30 years later, and we're talking about this, you were a man that was there as a diplomat, and all of a sudden you're thrown in the role as essentially a CIA agent. What you are saying and what you're reporting is being seen by President Carter at the time, and they're strategizing based on your information. How does that make you feel? What are you thinking today?
Well, it was almost like a Walter Mitty world. It's not something I anticipated in my role as a Canadian diplomat, but circumstances called for it. And I think that it comes down to instinct as to oftentimes what you do in a situation like this. You can think about it, you can contemplate about it, you can talk with your government, but I think everybody knows basically what they should do. And in this case, it was something that Canada wanted to do. They wanted to do whatever we could for the United States at that time. And it involved keeping the sick safe, but in a sense of greater jeopardy for the embassy, it was the involvement drawing up the plans for Eagle Claw.
Moments after Ronald Reagan took the oath of office, this Iranian hostage situation came to a close. And really the attention on Islamic extremism also went away. Now that we have a look at this, and now we're going to fast forward here and go back in hindsight, we go to September 2001, and we have 9/11. Being that you were there and you saw some of this happen, were the warning signs there?
I think very much so. The Iranian Revolution and Khomeini's emergence really underlined the vulnerability of the West, if I can use the word the West. We're in a very high-risk, dangerous game. Unpredictable, unanticipated, not scripted. So the momentum was there. What shape it would take was up in the air, but the reality of 9/11 reflected those early days in Tehran.
And one more thing quickly before we go here. Do people still come up to you and regard you as a hero and recognize you as that guy?
Well, it's a good life in New York. I haven't paid for a beer in a long time.
So that would be a yes. It's an incredible story. It reads like a spy thriller, and I tell you, it's a real life story. And the main character sitting right here beside me, Our Man in Tehran. It is in stores right now. And Ambassador, we appreciate you being here this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.